When you go no contact, the first thing that happens is not outward drama or obvious reaction. It's something far quieter and far more unsettling for her. The narcissistic woman begins replaying you internally, not nostalgically, not romantically, but compulsively. Conversations rerun in her mind, moments where she felt admired, dominant, desired, then moments where she felt questioned, resisted, or unseen. Silence removes her ability to correct the narrative in real time, and that is deeply destabilizing. From a psychological standpoint, this is where the ego loses its mirror. Carl Jung spoke about the necessity of reflection for the ego to remain intact. The narcissistic personality relies heavily on external reflection to maintain its self-image. When you withdraw completely, you don't just leave her life, you remove the stage. And without an audience, the performance doesn't stop. It turns inward. She may appear calm, indifferent, even empowered on the surface, but internally the mind circles. Why did you stop responding? Why didn't you chase? Why didn't you collapse without her? These questions aren't about love or connection. They're about control and meaning. Your absence introduces an unanswered question her psyche cannot easily resolve. This internal replay happens daily, not because she misses intimacy, but because unresolved silence triggers the shadow, the part of the self she works hardest to avoid, the part that fears insignificance, the part that wonders whether the power she believed she held was ever real at all. And this is the paradox. By doing nothing, by staying silent, you force self-confrontation. Not growth. Narcissism resists that, but awareness. And awareness, even when rejected, leaves a mark. Remember this. Silence is not empty. In the right context, it becomes a mirror. And what someone sees in that mirror can change them, or finally free you. After the internal replay begins, something else quietly follows: observation. When you go no contact, the narcissistic woman often shifts into a monitoring mode. Not openly, not dramatically, but subtly. She looks for traces of you, through social media, mutual acquaintances, indirect mentions, even silence itself. This isn't curiosity in the human sense. It's psychological surveillance. She is searching for evidence that she still exists in your emotional world. From a Jungian perspective, this is about the ego's dependence on external confirmation. The narcissistic structure is not self-generating. It feeds on response. Attention, admiration, anger, these are all forms of psychic nourishment. When you remove direct access, the psyche compensates by watching from the shadows, hoping to detect movement, reaction, or collapse. What matters most is not whether you appear happy or struggling. What matters is whether you appear affected. A single post, a vague quote, a second-hand comment can become proof that the bond still holds power. If she senses emotional disturbance, it reassures her inner narrative: I still matter. I still influence. If she senses nothing, something far more uncomfortable emerges: irrelevance. This is why no contact must be clean. Not performative silence, not strategic posting, not subtle signaling. Those behaviors keep the psychic thread alive. True absence deprives the narcissistic ego of feedback. And without feedback, the mind begins to destabilize its own assumptions. Philosophically, this is the moment where you unknowingly shift from participant to observer. You stop reacting and start existing independently. And independence is deeply threatening to a personality built on relational dominance. Take this with you. The moment you stop proving anything, you reclaim something. And what you reclaim is not power over them, but power over yourself. As the monitoring yields less and less reassurance, a new behavior tends to emerge: acceleration. When you go no contact, the narcissistic woman often moves quickly to replace you. Not gradually, not thoughtfully, but with urgency. New attention, new admiration, new faces. On the surface, this can look like indifference or triumph. Psychologically, it is neither. It is a response to emptiness. In Jungian terms, the narcissistic ego cannot tolerate a vacuum. Where a stable self might turn inward and reflect, the narcissistic structure turns outward and consumes. Validation becomes a substitute for identity. The new person is not chosen for connection, depth, or compatibility, but for availability. Whoever can reflect admiration most easily becomes the mirror of the moment. Yet something important happens beneath the surface. Replacement does not resolve loss, it masks it. Each new interaction is unconsciously compared to the old dynamic. The nervous system remembers the intensity, the familiarity, the emotional leverage. And because the new supply lacks shared history, it lacks depth. What follows is restlessness. The attention works briefly, then fades. So the search continues. This is why narcissistic relationships often appear fast, dramatic, and short-lived. They are not built to grow. They are built to regulate internal discomfort. You were not simply a person in her life. You were a stabilizing structure. Your withdrawal removes that structure, and no quick substitute can replicate it. For you, this phase can be misleading. Seeing her move on rapidly may trigger doubt, self-blame, or the urge to re-engage. But what you are witnessing is not healing. It is compensation. And compensation collapses when it is mistaken for fulfillment. Understand this clearly. The speed of replacement is not a measure of your value. It is evidence of dependency. When you refuse to fill the void again, you force reality to speak. And reality, unlike attention, cannot be replaced. When replacement fails to restore equilibrium, the psyche turns to narrative. This is where rewriting the story becomes essential. The narcissistic woman begins to reinterpret the past, not to understand it, but to protect herself from its implications. Events are reshaped, motives are reassigned, and outcomes are reframed until the conclusion is psychologically survivable. In this revised version, she did not lose control. You were flawed. She was not abandoned. You were incapable. The story must end with her intact. Jung understood this as a defense against the shadow. The shadow contains everything the ego cannot tolerate about itself: vulnerability, dependency, inadequacy. When you go no contact, you activate that shadow. The simplest way to avoid it is not reflection, but distortion. Memory becomes a tool of self-preserver, shan rather than truth. This process often unfolds socially. Friends are told selective versions. Details are omitted. Your silence is interpreted as weakness or immaturity. Not because this is accurate, but because it aligns with the internal story she needs to believe. If she can convince others, she can momentarily convince herself. What's important to grasp is that this narrative is not stable. It must be repeated, reinforced, and defended. Any contradiction, a reminder of your independence, a sign that you are thriving, threatens to crack it. This is why narcissistic storytelling often feels rigid and exaggerated. Flexibility would require self-examination, and self-examination risks collapse. For you, the temptation may be to correct the record, to defend your name, to explain your side. But engaging only feeds the narrative machine. Silence denies it fuel. Over time, the story loses energy because it lacks opposition. Here is the deeper truth. You do not need to be understood to be free. The moment you stop arguing with a distorted story, you step out of it. And when you do, the need to rewrite the past stays with them, not you. The rewritten story begins to strain under its own weight. Emotional instability sets in. This is where the internal experience becomes inconsistent and volatile. One day, the narcissistic woman feels elevated, convinced of her superiority, reassured by attention, certain that she has moved on untouched. The next day, a very different emotional current appears: irritation, resentment, or an unexpected sense of emptiness. These fluctuations are not random. They are the result of a psyche trying to stabilize itself without its usual anchor. Jung described the ego as something that requires balance between inner and outer realities. When that balance is disrupted, compensation occurs. For the narcissistic personality, compensation often takes the form of emotional oscillation. Superiority emerges to suppress insecurity. Rage emerges when superiority fails. Neither state is peaceful because neither is grounded in an integrated self. No contact removes emotional leverage. There is no reaction to provoke, no validation to extract, no conflict to control. Without these mechanisms, emotions have nowhere to discharge. They turn inward, intensify, and swing. This is why silence can feel so powerful. It does not attack, it simply refuses to regulate another person's inner chaos. At times, anger dominates, not because of what you did, but because of what you stopped doing. Rage often masks helplessness. At other times, a hollow calm appears, an unsettling sense that something essential is missing. These moments are quickly avoided through distraction, attention-seeking, or renewed attempts at control. For you, understanding this prevents a common mistake, interpreting emotional volatility as progress or vulnerability. It is neither. It is dysregulation, and dysregulation is not an invitation to return. It is a signal to remain steady. Hold on to this insight. When someone swings between feeling above you and furious at you, they are not moving toward clarity. They are resisting it. Your consistency becomes the quiet force that ends the cycle by refusing to participate in it. Eventually, beneath the monitoring, the replacements, the rewritten narratives, and the emotional swings, a quieter realization settles in. It doesn't arrive dramatically. It doesn't announce itself. It emerges slowly, almost reluctantly. The truth no contact forces is simple, and that is precisely why it is so difficult to escape. You are no longer needed. For a narcissistic woman, this is not an ordinary loss. It is an existential one. Jung understood that when a persona collapses, what follows is not insight, but anxiety. The narcissistic identity is built around being central, desired, influential, indispensable. Your absence doesn't just remove a relationship, it challenges the belief that she is necessary for another person's psychological survival. This realization surfaces in moments of stillness, when attention fades, when distractions fail, when there is no one to provoke, impress, or control. In those moments, a question appears that cannot be easily dismissed. If they can live without me, what does that say about who I am? This question is deeply threatening because it points toward an identity that was never fully self-generated. Most will not consciously face this truth. Instead, it is buried under activity, validation, or contempt. But suppression does not erase awareness, it only delays it. On some level, the psyche registers what has happened. The power dynamic has changed. The illusion of indispensability has fractured. For you, this is the turning point. Not because she finally understands, but because you do. You realize that your value was never in being needed, but in being whole. No contact was not an act of punishment. It was an act of alignment with reality, with self-respect, with psychological truth. Sit with this. When you stop trying to prove your worth, you remove yourself, from games that require you to lose. And in that moment, whether anyone else changes or not, your freedom begins.